Hello, everybody. We are here with another episode of Main Stage Wrestling right here on WERW Real College Radio. And I am very confused about the setup right now because I'm I have no idea what's going on because well, first off, I have already messed up pretty majorly. I tried to play the NXT theme song and somehow it clicked the wrong one. I don't know how that happened. So we had some other song by, I guess it was Slipknot, and now I'm looking at the board right here in front of me, and I keep peeking into the red for the audio. So I don't know if that's messing stuff up too. I have no idea what's going on with all of this. It's a very very confusing thing, and I would love to be able to hear myself in my headphones, but I can't do that either. So it's a mess technically, and then also another very very big piece component of this show this week, of this episode of Main Stage Wrestling, is the fact that I'm here in the WERW studio by my lonesome, by myself, because I don't have a co-host today, guys. Unfortunately, Sam Gelfand, my usual buddy that comes on here and talks with me about wrestling every single week, except for the past two, it was unable to make it today, and I found out just like 10 minutes before the show. So I'm playing this. I am going along with this, finding out stuff just at the same time that the audience is. So if this show is a mess, that's just it's par for the course, I feel, because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm gonna have to sit here. I'm gonna have to talk. I'm gonna have to ramble like an absolute lunatic, and like I guess that's not unusual for this show, but just in the sense that it'll be even stronger, even more prominent, in the sense that I'm here just talking to myself alone. And so I believe Sam slept in, and then about 20 minutes before the show, he realized, oh, damn, I have to get over to the studio because there's a show going on. And basically, we ended up deciding that there wasn't enough time for him to get here. So I'm here, I'm in the studio, and I am going to be taking on this November 2nd, 2019 edition of Main Stage Wrestling by myself. This first ever broadcast that I have to do by myself because I don't have any experience with this whatsoever. I really don't. So I'm going to take a while rather to get into the actual wrestling this week, because I don't know how much content I'm actually going to have by myself, because I'm not going to have this actual dialogue going on. It's just going to be me with basically a monologue, an hour-long monologue about wrestling. So I'm gonna take my time. I'm gonna try not to rush through anything. So this intro is gonna go deep, guys. So I don't have this great vast experience with broadcasting alone, broadcasting by myself, speaking with just Jacy, just the person that you're hearing right now. Because even with the podcast that I do outside of this show and the other radio show that I do, I don't have to talk by myself for these long periods of time. Like, my co-host on my podcast has never missed an episode, thankfully, so I've just never had to do it. And then with my music show that I do, it's only for like 3 minute increments that I'll talk at most, and not even that most of the time. So this is gonna be me going the stretch, going a full 60-ish minutes. Like, there are some breaks I'm gonna have with songs, and then I'm gonna wrap things up pretty early too, I feel, just because now, as opposed to the past couple weeks this semester we've been doing the show, we have another show that's right after us that has taken up that slot. So they'll be coming in the studio around the end of the hour, so we'll have to adjust for them as well. No more Ely hour, I don't feel. But that all out there, those disclaimers for this show out of the way, I want to talk now about why Main Stage Wrestling hasn't been on the air for the past 2 weeks. So, if we go back 2 weeks ago, from this very day, from this very time, I was here, I was in this studio, I was ready to go. Sam Gelfand was also here. We were ready to talk all about our wrestling. And unfortunately, just the computers, the technical system, whatever it was that was going on here, just it wasn't working at all whatsoever. We tried messing around with the computers. We tried to get it all working so we could go live, go onto the air. And whatever we did, nothing worked. We logged into the computer too after a while, which was something we had problems with also. And even still, we were here for over an hour trying to get everything figured out, trying to figure out how to go live, and it didn't end up working out. We tried reaching out to certain people at the station to see if they could help us, and nothing was too informative or helpful. Nothing was able to get us back on the air, at least. So we just called it a day, and we recorded ourselves walking over to his bus stop, and we uploaded that to YouTube, and it was a good like maybe 15 minutes of conversation. And so You know what I don't even know, guys, is if I'm even broadcasting live to the air right now. I get Oh, my mom just texted me get into the wrestling. Damn. I'm sorry, Mom. I guess I will. I wanted to describe what was going on. My bad. Okay, well I guess let's get into the wrestling. But also we didn't have shows the past 2 weeks because of difficulties and people being away, so my apologies for all of that. So yeah, my mom just destroyed any and all confidence I had in myself broadcasting here right now. So we'll get into the news stories. That's what the show is called. It's called Main Stage Wrestling, and I'm 7 minutes in just rambling to myself about I don't know what. So, you know what? That's fair. Thank you, Mother, because we do. We've got to get into the news stories, the top 5 news stories of the week in professional wrestling as I see them. And that first story would be just last night with Friday Night SmackDown live on Fox. NXT sort of took over. All the superstars from the NXT brand, the vast majority of them at least, made their appearance on SmackDown, their first ever time on Fox now, and just on network television in general, aside from their few weeks on USA now. And that was because a large portion of the actual WWE roster, the SmackDown and Raw rosters, were unable to make it in time to whatever city they were in. I think they were in Buffalo, New York. They were unable to make it to Buffalo because there was a technical delay in their flight, and basically all the superstars, all the staff, all the production for WWE that was in Saudi Arabia for Crown Jewel this past Thursday, they were stuck there because their flight, which was supposed to take off around noon that day, was stuck there on the tarmac for over 6 hours and didn't end up taking off until about 9:30 p.m., an hour and a half into that episode of SmackDown. So last minute, the entire NXT roster had to fly up to Buffalo from Florida, and apparently they arrived at just 7:55 p.m., 5 minutes before they got broadcast live on Fox, and they had a police escort to the arena, and they were able to stall, I guess, at the actual arena with the few superstars that were actually there by putting Nikki Cross and Bayley in a championship match. And so by the end of that match, the NXT roster had arrived at the arena, and Shayna Baszler came out, and she just laid waste of Sasha Banks, Bayley, Nikki Cross, and just the top of that SmackDown women's division. So it was just a very weird episode of SmackDown altogether, in the sense that it wasn't an episode of SmackDown per se, because there were many more NXT superstars than there were actual WWE SmackDown superstars. So that was the first appearance from anyone in NXT. It was Shayna Baszler coming out and attacking Bayley and Sasha. And then later on in the night, we also saw an appearance from Matt Riddle and Keith Lee when they, I guess, took up issue with Sami Zayn for some reason. I don't remember him saying anything too terrible, but Matt Riddle and Keith Lee took umbrage at whatever it was he was saying and just decided to beat him up and chase him around the arena and then out to the ring, and they beat him up, and they looked a bit like bullies. But it was at that point in the show, when you realize Shayna was in the first segment and then Lee and Riddle were in the second one, that, oh, maybe something's going on here, and there's a reason that all these NXT superstars are on the brand. Because at first, when you first see Shayna, I was under the impression that maybe it was just her getting called up, and then as I went on the internet, I found out that basically the entire roster was still in Saudi Arabia, and that was not so much the case. But this all laid the groundwork for one of the best episodes of SmackDown in a very, very long time, and that, in my opinion, is thanks to 2 matches in specific, and that would be first, Tommaso Ciampa versus The Miz, when they had this great segment where The Miz had an episode of Miz TV, which was originally supposed to just be him interviewing himself. And I'm not entirely sure the reason why he was back in America yet, or if he just didn't go to Saudi Arabia, or what that reasoning was. But he was there. He was in Buffalo for SmackDown, and he had his own episode of Miz TV where he was interviewing himself. But then Tommaso Ciampa, one of the biggest stars in NXT, comes out, and he has a bit of a verbal confrontation with The Miz, and I enjoyed it. Those are two amazing guys on the microphone. The Miz is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, and it was very, very fun of a segment that I didn't expect to see at all, or like not even just on this episode I didn't expect to see it, but just in general or ever. Tommaso Ciampa versus The Miz just feels like a very weird combination, and it was a really fun match actually. And there's someone outside the studio right now, and I'm not entirely sure who they are, but they're looking at me with a real weird face. Okay, well, they're gone now. So Tommaso Ciampa versus The Miz. See, people just throw me off so bad. Tommaso Ciampa versus The Miz in a very fun match, but I could be very, very biased in having enjoyed it because of how big a fan I am of The Miz. But also just watch the segment before, not the segment, but watch the preceding segment before that match, whereas the two of them on the microphone with one another for Miz TV. You know, it's Mr. Sports Entertainment Tommaso Ciampa, that's his self-proclaimed nickname, against The Miz, who is legitimately Mr. Sports Entertainment. And it was just a very, very fun time. And then after that match between Ciampa and Miz, we saw Fire and Desire, Mandy Rose and Sonya Deville, come out. And I guess I don't know if they issued an open challenge or what the deal was, but they were supposed to be fighting Carmella and Dana Brooke because the majority of the women were not over in Saudi Arabia because the country is not too fond of that gender, that sex. So a lot of the women were there for SmackDown, Carmella and Dana Brooke included. And so they were supposed to be taking on Fire and Desire, but we cut to backstage and Bianca Belair is just taking down the two of them backstage, beating the hell out of them. And basically it sets the stage for Tegan Nox and Rhea Ripley, two of the biggest women in NXT, to come out and challenge Fire and Desire and to have a pretty fun match, I'd say. It's just fun in the sense that you wouldn't expect it to happen. It wasn't this classic by any means, but it was just an enjoyable sort of moment and part of this very strange episode of SmackDown. And then lastly, my final point on this episode of SmackDown, which I've been talking at length about, is that main event. Because we go to a segment backstage with Daniel Bryan walking around, again, one of the only superstars over here in the United States when SmackDown was live, because he is, I guess, morally against traveling to the kingdom of Saudi Arabia and performing a show for the government and taking the blood money that WWE is receiving for such. And so he was there. He was able to have this segment backstage with Triple H and Shawn Michaels, who were also revealed to be there as per their involvement in NXT. And it looked like Daniel at one point was about to challenge Triple H to a match, but Triple H had said that he was not going to be participating in any sort of fight that night, and nor was Shawn Michaels, who was right next to him. And instead, he was going to be fighting the champion of NXT, and that of Adam Cole, which Daniel was very enthusiastic about and even challenged Cole for the title, to which Cole accepted. And so that set the stage for the main event, which, I mean, for the first time in a very long time, that was an amazing main event, which went over 20 minutes between Cole and Bryan. And so I had a lot of fun watching it. It was just a really cool show in general. And then also, not to mention, Ciampa beat The Miz, and then Adam Cole beat Daniel Bryan, which is a really huge deal, I feel, for NXT, because you're allowing these guys who just a few months ago were considered developmental, weren't even on television, they were just on the network on a 1-hour show, and now here they are on Fox on what WWE is trying to push right now as their biggest show, and they're putting over their NXT guys in a really big way by, again, having them beat The Miz, who's just one of the biggest superstars in the company, and also Daniel Bryan, who was just WWE champion in April. So it was a very big deal and a very just cool episode of SmackDown that was exciting and different, and probably better than anything that would have happened had the flight from Saudi Arabia gone according to plan. So it was just a very fun time in general. But we can move on to our next story of this weird week in WWE, and that of some of the events that happened at that Crown Jewel event in Saudi Arabia this past Thursday. And I think the biggest story coming out of that is the fact that the Fiend, Bray Wyatt, is now the Universal Champion. And I feel like maybe they were a bit slow to pull the trigger by not having him win at Hell in a Cell against Seth Rollins, when I think more fans were enthusiastic about the character, were enthusiastic about him becoming champion than they were going into Crown Jewel necessarily. But they did it, and Bray ended up winning after he got thrown into a pile of fireworks, which exploded all in him. But then Seth got a couple of sparks in his eyes, and it allowed Bray to get up out of the fireworks and shove his fingers in Seth's mouth, and that's sort of how he won. It was a very strange finish. It was a cool match. It was a fun match, but it just, again, I don't know if they missed their opportunity to capitalize on all the momentum that the Fiend had going into that original Hell in the Cell event. And I'm still really happy he's champion, but it's almost I don't know, not an emptiness that comes along with it, but it's a bit underwhelming, because I can't tell if this is WWE trying to make up for the negative reaction and the immensely negative reaction that they received after Hell in a Cell, or if it's just a thing of more long-term storytelling. Because you always hear people that are defenders of WWE say that critics never give them a chance to fully tell a story. They're too quick to criticize. They're too quick to say, "Oh, the story's failing. This isn't how it's supposed to be," before a story is actually given the chance to actually unfold in full. Because it's a week-to-week thing. For stories to play out in pro wrestling, generally it's a fairly long-term event, and so what'll happen is a lot of times, again, these defenders of WWE will say that the critics aren't giving them enough time. So I can't tell if this is an instance of people that were criticizing the finish of Hell in a Cell being too impatient with Bray becoming champion, with the Fiend becoming champion, or if it's them correcting course. Because as much as I'd like to think it's them planning this long story where Bray is supposed to win it at Crown Jewel, I don't necessarily think that's what this is in the slightest. And I guess only time will tell, and how natural and how fleshed out this championship run of the Fiend seems. But I should just stop being so negative and pessimistic and be happy that the Fiend is champion, because that's what I wanted, and it happened, and it's just a really, really nice thing. And also, as a result of the Fiend winning the Universal title, the Fiend is a SmackDown superstar at the moment. He was drafted to SmackDown just a few weeks ago. And Seth Rollins, on the other hand, was a Raw superstar, so Raw had that Universal Championship. And with Bray winning it, both titles, the WWE title, which Brock Lesnar held, and the Universal Championship, which the Fiend held, were over there on the Blue brand on Friday nights. And so when we opened up this episode of SmackDown last night, it was Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman coming to the ring, and basically it was Brock Lesnar announcing that he was quitting SmackDown and moving over to Raw, which solves that problem of having your two main titles on the one brand. So that's another one of those components that makes me think that maybe it was a more planned out thing from WWE, in the sense that they had this plan in mind to move Brock Lesnar over to Raw all along. But again, there's really no way to know until like 20 years from now, when I guess Bray Wyatt puts out a book, or he does an interview, a tell-all, or a shoot interview. But it's cool to try to theorize about, try to put together in your own head. The one criticism I do have of the actual match itself between The Fiend and Seth, though, is that red light that they have going on throughout the entire thing. Because it was cool for Hell in a Cell, because it was a first-time deal. The cage was red, and it felt like a very special environment, and the way that Bray was treating it during the Firefly Funhouses was that it was hell in a ring. I mean, it's called Hell in a Cell, of course, but at the end of every one of his segments of the Firefly Funhouse, he'd say to Seth, "See you in hell." And so the idea that there's these red lights shining all throughout his match, it was cool, and it was novelty. But I don't think it's a thing I want to see in every single Fiend match, because it's going to get pretty old and pretty tiring quick, and I don't know if it slows the pace of the matches, or if it makes you more tired, or I don't know what it is, but it's not something I want to see as reoccurring. Because it reminds me of when Sin Cara debuted back in around 2011, and they had the mood lighting for him, and it was cool maybe when he first debuted, but like when you're 12 weeks in and you're still doing the mood lighting, and Sin Cara isn't really doing all that much, it's just strange and doesn't feel necessary, and breaks up. It feels like a very different part of the show, if that makes any sense. And I don't know if that's always a good thing. I don't know if that's always something you're going to want. But also, The Fiend doesn't strike me as a guy who's going to wrestle in every single episode of SmackDown. So it could work out. I don't know. If it were up to me, there'd be no more red light going forward. That's it. Then I did see also online that there was all this criticism of Bray Wyatt coming to the ring, The Fiend coming to the ring with his severed head of himself that he brought out with him at SummerSlam when he fought Finn Balor. Because it's that little lantern that he has, which is his own head with his mouth open where the light's shining out of. And it looked really cool, and it was great. But now everyone's getting freaked out about it because they're in Saudi Arabia, the same country who is responsible for the death of Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist who was murdered in the embassy last year, which was, I guess, the biggest news story in the company, or sorry, not the company, the biggest news story in the world at the time, where that country had dismembered the man, dismembered the journalist, and I believe decapitation is part of dismemberment. And so I guess The Fiend showing up with a again, a dismembered head wasn't the most socially aware thing to do. I mean, it's a silly criticism because it's not like he had the lantern made specifically for this show. it was not intentional by any means, but when there's already this much criticism around WWE doing a show in Saudi Arabia to begin with, I feel like you're already so in that deep. A dismembered head in the hands of Bray Wyatt isn't really going to change that much because, I mean, you're doing a show in Saudi Arabia to begin with, so I don't know how you get much more extreme than that, if you get what I'm saying. And then the third news story I want to speak about also comes out of that Crown Jewel event from this past Thursday, and that would be the Cain Velasquez and Tyson Fury matches we saw go down. These were these huge, huge novelty matches that we were building up to for the past couple months, where massive athletes from outside the world of WWE, but still within the realm of combat sports, were going to be stepping in to a sports entertainment arena for the first time ever to take on their respective opponents, Brock Lesnar and Braun Strowman. And I wish Sam were here to talk about this one specifically, because I know how much he enjoys these outsider matches where someone from a different sport or from a different industry comes into wrestling and has to perform on that same level and has to connect with the audience and has to just learn this entire new sport in what is usually just a matter of weeks for these outsiders. And at Crown Jewel, unfortunately, we didn't get the same sort of amazing energy, that same sort of special event that we saw at WrestleMania a couple years ago when Ronda Rousey made her debut, when she teamed up with Kurt Angle to take on Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, because that match was incredible and it was so amazing, and Ronda blew away any and all expectations. But then you compare it to Tyson Fury's match against Braun and Cain Velasquez's match against Brock Lesnar. They were just so underwhelming, especially for all the energy and all the promotion that went into them as well. It just felt very especially when you open the show with Brock Lesnar versus Cain Velasquez, which Cain Velasquez is the man who defeated Brock Lesnar in the UFC. I guess the second man to defeat him in the UFC. But still, he's built up as this giant. He's supposed to be defending the honor of Rey Mysterio and his son Dominic. And you're building up to it so big. Like, Brock Lesnar's the beast. This is the one man who's ever been able to match up to him. And then you have Cain Velasquez tap out in 2 minutes. It just doesn't make much sense. And then you also know that Cain Velasquez has this professional wrestling skill, because we've seen him compete in other companies like that of AAA down in Mexico. And he can do these really cool moves, and he can put on these entertaining matches. But at Crown Jewel, we didn't see that from him at all, because instead they just had him in a very sort of UFC, MMA style type of match where he didn't really do all that much. Like, the offense that he did get in against Brock in those 2-3 minutes that the match actually went on, they looked terrible, which I can't blame him, because he's not a professional wrestler. He's an ultimate fighter. He is a mixed martial artist. And so to learn this style of where you're not actually trying to maim your opponent, I imagine it's a very, very hard thing to do, especially in such a short amount of time. But then what WWE shouldn't have done is put him in a title match and on such a big stage for his very, very first match in the WWE, because when you do, it ends up like this, and just any and all expectations and all the hype was just for nothing, because the match was not that good. I struggle to call it a match because of just how bad the offense was, because of how underwhelming the finish was, and it wasn't fun to watch. It shouldn't have been on the show. It shouldn't have been for the title, and it sort of stunk. And I don't like saying that. I don't like to be so negative of wrestling, especially when I'm here talking to myself about it, because it makes me feel all that much more of a loser and a lunatic. But it wasn't amazing. And then we move on later in that same night to when Tyson Fury, the heavyweight boxing champion of the world, took on Braun Strowman. And, I mean, it was better than what we saw earlier in the night with Velasquez and Lesnar, but it wasn't just amazing match by any means. It was novelty, and I'm sure if you're a fan of boxing and you're a fan of Tyson Fury, it didn't disappoint, because you're seeing him in a WWE ring, you're seeing him take on Braun Strowman. It's just weird and probably cool to watch, but until Tyson Fury showed up on Raw a couple weeks ago, I had never heard of the man in my entire life, so I didn't necessarily care about it in that respect. So when you end up just having a very boring match between two big guys that ends in a count out on one of your biggest shows of the year, it doesn't feel like it belongs there either. Because this was by far the best Crown Jewel event that WWE has put on so far, by all means, because you go back to the Greatest Royal Rumble. I mean, that was fine, but I mainly remember it for the couple of botches that they had. There was one specifically where Jeff Hardy hit I think it was a whisper in the wind off the top rope, and he totally missed with Jinder Mahal. And then later in the night, it was the finish of the Universal Championship match between Brock and Roman Reigns. And they screwed that up as well because I guess Roman's feet actually hit the ground first, but Brock was still crowned the winner. And so that show is not remembered with the greatest level of fondness. And then the couple of shows in Saudi Arabia after that weren't too amazing either. But then on this one, we got matches like Mansoor versus Cesaro, which was amazing. And Mansoor is an absolute star, and I'm really happy that he had this chance to show what he can do on a really big stage in front of a crowd that was so behind him as well. Because, again, he's that sort of hometown hero for the guys in Saudi Arabia. So that match was very fun, and Cesaro did great as well. It was a big spotlight for him, too. And then later in the night, we had Humberto Carrillo versus AJ Styles for the U.S. Championship, which was also a really fun match. Those two matches made it a much better show altogether. They brought it up very, very high. And then you end the show, too, with The Fiend winning the Universal title. It was a good show as a whole. Definitely the best Saudi Arabia show that WWE has put on yet. But I don't know. That Fury match and that Velasquez match, really, they knocked it down a whole lot of pegs, and it wasn't the most exciting thing in the world. But that's where we're at with those first three news stories, guys. I don't know if this made any sense to anyone listening, if my line of thinking was easy to follow, if it just came out as rambling, if it came out as word vomit. I'm apologizing if that's the case. But those were the first three stories. I'll be back in just a couple minutes with the next few before we get on into the match of the week. So until then, I'm going to play a rad right now, and we'll be back here on WERW Real College Radio in just a few minutes. Hey, we're back here with Main Stage Wrestling right on WERW Real College Radio. I am Jacy Cola, and that was a song called Earl Grey by Jelani Aryeh, which was one of the songs that I am required to play by WERW, so I hope it was something enjoyable to get us through this little break into our next bit of news stories in the world of professional wrestling. Again, I am here alone this week. I am not joined by Sam Gelfand, but he should be back 7 days from now when we are live again with Main Stage Wrestling. And also, somehow during the break, I figured out how to get my headphones working so I can finally hear myself. That's an amazing thing, especially when it's just me talking to myself. It's a beautiful, beautiful occasion now. I'm a bit more excited about everything that's going on. So, it's about time we get into our last two news stories of the week before our match of the week. And news story number 4 for me, as I saw it, was on AEW Tuesday Night Dynamite when SCU, the team of Scorpio Sky and Frankie Kazarian, became the first ever AEW Tag Team Champions of the world. And they were in the main event. They were fighting the Lucha Brothers, the team of Penta, El Cero Miedo, or I think he's just Pentagon Jr. again, which is lovely, him and Rey Fenix, and it was a very, very fun match, and I love both those teams, and I was cool with either one of them winning. They had both made it to the end of their respective branch of the tournament, and so they were facing off in the finals, and it was a fun match. There wasn't any interference. It was just a fun, good match to determine the first ever champions. And honestly, it's probably better off that SCU were the winners and not the Lucha Brothers, because if you think back to the AEW shows that had all gone on before they went live on TNT, SCU was used as mainly this talent who they knew were going to have these amazing matches. That goes for all three of them, for Scorpio Sky, for Frankie Kazarian, for Christopher Daniels. It goes for all of them. They were there and they could trust them to have these amazing matches, but they weren't putting them in the greatest of the greatest of circumstances. They weren't giving them this major spot to shine, in the sense that they were losing all their matches. And I know that's not a death sentence in the world of wrestling by any means, but it felt like they might get pigeonholed into that role sort of permanently, and especially with how big they are on the show being the Elite, which sort of led to All Elite Wrestling even existing. You'd figure that they'd have a bigger role in the company than just being those good hands, if you will. So I think winning the tag team championships are a great way for them to get out of that role they were sort of slotted into at first, and it helps them cement themselves as major stars in the company, which Pentagon and Phoenix are going to be regardless of whether or not they're holding any gold, because they're just two of the coolest wrestlers in professional wrestling in general. They're two of the best also, just some of the greatest, coolest wrestlers. Also, they have action figures out now, which cost $45 each, which is an insane price for any sort of action figure, but just the fact that they have them in general is very cool, and I thought was worth pointing out, because, wow, they look great. But the Lucha Brothers did not win the titles, SCU did, and it helps build up that credibility that they lost, so I was pretty excited about it. And I'm trying to think back on what else happened in AEW this week, and there wasn't too much, I feel. NXT, I think, was by far the bigger and better show as far as those Wednesday Night Wars went this week, because especially when you look at NXT and you have Finn Balor coming out and cementing himself as this bad guy that we thought he was going to be after he kicked Johnny Gargano over the head last week. And I think this week also, too, cemented that he's not going to be joining the Undisputed Era, per se, and that he's just going to be his own cool, just badass Finn Balor, which is pretty exciting because we've never seen a bad guy Finn Balor yet in WWE. He's been with the company since about, I think, 2015, 2016, and he's been a good guy that entire time, which in wrestling, especially in 2019, it's a very hard thing to maintain a certain level of popularity while being a good guy, which Finn has been able to do all throughout. So that's just really impressive, and I don't think his popularity ever wavered, per se. Maybe the position in which he was at in the company wavered, because we saw him go from NXT champ, being on top of that brand, to becoming Universal champ, then getting injured, and then just sort of riding it out in the upper mid card for a few years. So it wasn't necessarily the steadiest of careers, but still, he was a popular guy, the fans liked him, and he was a good guy all throughout. So we haven't seen the side of him in WWE yet, and it's really exciting that we get to, because based off of his promo on NXT this week, it looks like he's really comfortable in that role, and he's breaking some boundaries too, which I know it's not as innovative or unique now in this sort of time in 2019 to break the fourth wall and try to, because what he said about losing the Fiend at SummerSlam this year, about how he was forced to lay down for the hottest thing in the company just because he put a mask on, like that sort of breaking the fourth wall, it's not this unheard of thing anymore. But coming from him, from Finn Balor, just with how stark of a contrast it is to the Finn Balor we knew just a few weeks ago, I think it's a pretty cool and exciting way to take him in that character. And so we had that on NXT this week. Then we also saw Keith Lee and Matt Riddle team up to take on the Undisputed Era in what was a really exciting match. And then you compare it to AEW this week, where I don't really remember all that much aside from the main event where SCU won those tag team championships. So I still think both brands are going at it really hard and trying to put on the best shows that they possibly can, but AEW has themselves in a weird position where Full Gear, their first ever pay-per-view since starting up television, isn't still for another few weeks, and really they've been ready to put on this show for at least 2 weeks now, because Cody versus Chris Jericho is your biggest match you have, and just that segment this week on the show felt so awkward, where Cody was riding in a car with Tony Schiavone and you could barely hear them at times. It was weird, and then you had the contract signing where Chris Jericho came out, and it just felt clunky and strange, and like the match should already be happening, because whatever that was that we saw on Wednesday didn't help in building my excitement for it. It didn't necessarily hinder my excitement either. It didn't take away from what I think is going to happen at Full Gear, but I also feel like we're at a place where we're just sort of waiting for the pay-per-view to happen so we can move in new directions with all these stories. So, and that's not the case that I feel at all with NXT. I'm just excited to watch their week-to-week programming. And maybe that's because takeovers are so much more spread out and so much further and fewer between. So you're not necessarily always building to a pay-per-view per se. You can have those major payoffs on TV, which AEW can't necessarily do at the moment because they have a pay-per-view coming up in just a few weeks. So that could be responsible for it in some respect, but I don't know. I'm still going to watch both shows. I'm still going to enjoy both shows. And again, the major point of all of this was just to point out that SCU are the first ever AEW Tag Team Champions, and I think they're amazing to be slotted into that role. So we can move on to our final news story of the week, and that comes in the main event segment of Raw this past week. It was before so much has already happened. This was almost a week ago. It feels so much longer because we've had Crown Jewel since, we have NXT, we've had AEW, we've had SmackDown. A lot of stuff has happened since Monday. But on that episode of Raw, we had the glorious segment that was the King's Court starring Rusev and Lana, and a surprise appearance from Bobby Lashley. And this storyline between Bobby Lashley and Rusev and Lana is something that a lot of fans hate with so much of their being, that they dislike so much about professional wrestling. But it feels like the most professional wrestling thing on TV every single week, because it's just the weirdest and wildest story that makes absolutely no sense, but it's also just it's fun to watch too. I'm not saying it's the greatest acting and it's the greatest performance and greatest storytelling that there's ever been, but it's fun to watch, and I think I'm in the very small minority, but I enjoyed the segment at the end of Raw this week because it was different and it was fun, and it separates Raw from either of the other brands that they're currently competing with, be it SmackDown, NXT, or AEW. And also, too, this is a storyline that could fail so easily, even more than I guess it's already being perceived to be failing, if any of those three weren't so committed to the roles that they are in. Because you see Lana, you see Bobby Lashley, they are fully in their roles, and you see how like just withdrawn and sad Rusev is, and all three of them are playing their parts and they're fully invested. And if they weren't, just imagine how much worse all of this would be, how poorer it would turn out on television every single week. So I'm sort of grateful that's not what has been happening. And then it was also revealed that I guess Rusev is officially a sex addict, and that's the reason that Lana is no longer with her husband. And that also he wanted to impregnate her when Lana wants to have her body intact and she can't be having any babies yet. So I guess we now know the reason behind their dissension in their relationship, sort of. I don't know. It's just a strange storyline, and the dynamic I feel is that the only bad guy here out of the three of them is Lana. Because, I mean, you have Bobby Lashley, but he's just with this girl who wants to be with him. And then you have Rusev, who just was betrayed by his wife and who presumably is lying about him on television. So I think it helps in building up Lana as this very hateable human being, and then you build a lot of sympathy for Rusev. Whether or not you hate the storyline, you feel bad for Rusev, either because, one, in the story his wife is cheating on him, or two, because he's been put in this role where he can only fail in a lot of people's eyes, where every single segment is going to be so atrocious that people are going to hate it. So in that way, people also feel bad for him because they know what he's capable of, and they know how good he is in a wrestling ring and on a microphone, usually when he's not playing the role of a cuckold. So I think it's not the worst thing in the world for the careers of Rusev or Lana. I mean, maybe for Bobby Lashley, just because his character is the most confusing thing I've seen in wrestling in a long time, because I have no clue who the guy is, because there have been so many different versions of him since he debuted just like a year and a half ago. Because at first he was a great guy who just did everything he did in his life because he wanted to be able to make his sisters and his mother proud. And then he was this like ultimate underdog who beat Roman Reigns. But then he got up with Leo Rush and became friends with Baron Corbin and Shane McMahon. And it's just, there have been a lot of ups and downs, and it doesn't feel like a consistent character per se. So maybe that's something that's not the greatest for his career, but I don't know. He's a big guy, he has a good look, and I'm sure he'll be champion again one day, so I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Plus, he's an older dude, too. I don't know how many years he has left in pro wrestling, but he's in his, I think, mid-40s, which he doesn't look at all. He looks insane and in great shape, but again, I don't know. I'm more concerned about Rusev here, and I think he's going to be fine, so that's good. All is right in the world. And so, again, going through these news stories, I just went through all the 5 that I had planned out, and I wish I would have taken more notes, because I didn't know I was going to be going this alone, and I am, and it's a bit more difficult than I had expected. That's not true. It's about as difficult as I expected. But I didn't have the notes prepared properly, so I think I'm going to just dabble into this next story, which deserves way more conversation, but I didn't really feel like it was something I should talk about or was worth including in the top 5 stories this week, because it was sort of a story from last week almost. But that story that I am referencing is that of Jordan Miles and his controversy surrounding his t-shirt. And just telling the story of what's happened there in general is going to take a very, very long time to do, and that is time that I do not have, and that is information I don't have properly laid out in my head. But I will share my opinions on it, because that's a smart thing for me to do. So the t-shirt itself, the one that he is so upset about and that a lot of people are upset about, they are right to be upset about. I feel it was very dumb, and it should never have been put out on their website to be sold for any length of time. I don't care if it was up there for a day or whatever. Also, too, when I first saw the design, I didn't realize what people were upset about. Because it just looked like a very bad t-shirt where it was a red circle with Jordan Miles' name on it. So in one respect, it shouldn't have been up there for sale because it was so poor quality and it just doesn't deserve to be worn by anyone. It's a very bad t-shirt. But then also when you realize what it could be interpreted as in sort of I guess being related to blackface, when you look at it through those eyes, just even if that's not the intention, which I don't believe it was, you as a company, as a multi-million-dollar company, should just have your druthers about yourself to a place where you're not going to put that for sale, just not even because that's your intention to put out this blackface looking t-shirt, but just to save yourself. Just don't even take the risk. It's very dumb, especially when I feel like there are enough people in line before that t-shirt gets posted to the website where someone can point it out and be like, hey, this is the problem. But that I'm all fine with. The t-shirt idea was dumb is the point. But then how ACH handled it on Twitter afterwards, and how he's built himself up to be this martyr of sorts and this sort of god, is very strange. And I didn't expect it from him whatsoever. And I think it's really hurting his cause, especially when he goes on Twitter and calls Jay Lethal Uncle Tom. Like, none of that's helping his case. And then he says F WWE in a video that he posts. It's not a good look for him. It's not a good look for any of the people that he's trying to support online with this hashtag for the culture movement. And I just think there are so many better ways that he could have handled this and not come off looking so just bad, because a lot of his point was sort of valid at first, but then when he goes about it the way he does and he keeps on just harping on it and proving his points in all the wrong ways, it doesn't do anything to help his case whatsoever. So that's where we're at. I guess we ended up having a top 6 stories in the world of professional wrestling this week. But it's about time that we go into another break, and I come back with our match of the week, which is John Cena versus Rob Van Dam from ECW One Night Stand 2006, which took place in June 11th, 2006 at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York. I'll be back with that in just a few moments. Here is another ad on WERW Real College Radio. Hello, we are back here with WERW Real College Radio's Main Stage Wrestling. I am Jacy Cola once again back here after that song that I can't even tell if I faded out of correctly because whatever's happening with the computer is out of my control. And there are a lot of technical errors that go on in this new studio, but I am here to take them all on head first. So, we're back here. We went through our news stories this week in the world of professional wrestling, and now it's time we get into our match of the week. And again, I'm really bummed out that Sam is not here to go over this with us, because this is one of his favorite matches of all time. This was the match that got him in to professional wrestling, and that is John Cena versus Rob Van Dam from One Night Stand. So, let me just provide some background of what this match was. Because first, let me explain what the segment is, because we haven't done it since May of last year. This is a segment where Sam and we randomly generate one of the greatest or worst matches of all time, as according to just professional wrestling fans as a whole, just the most notorious ones and the most beloved ones, and we have a 50-50 chance of either getting a really terrible match or a really amazing one, and this week happened to be one of those really amazing ones. And again, the match was John Cena versus Rob Van Dam at One Night Stand. And that pay-per-view used to be a once-a-year pay-per-view after the just total collapse of ECW once the company went under. WWE bought out the rights to the company. They had Paul Heyman working for them. And once a year, they would have this annual event starting in 2005 where they would go back to one of the ECW arenas and they would put on a show based around the ECW brand. And this was also the predecessor to what became WWECW, which was one of the first shows. I'm pretty certain, I'm like 99% certain, the first ever wrestling match I saw was an episode of WWECW, because I distinctly remember Hornswoggle climbing a ladder, and just at that time in 2008 when I would have seen it. Hornswoggle and Finlay were in ECW, but I've gone back and I've tried to find that match since, and I've had no luck whatsoever. But I'm pretty certain it was an episode of ECW. So the point of that is to say that this pay-per-view that the match took place on was on the thing that led to that show even existing. So theoretically, this show could have led to my fandom of wrestling as a whole. Who knows? But it did directly for Sam, because again, this was the first match that he had ever watched. So let's get into why this match even happened to begin with, because Rob Van Dam, a few months prior to this pay-per-view, had just become the number one contender to the WWE Championship by winning the Money in the Bank briefcase at WrestleMania 22, and he was the first guy to win that briefcase and announce that he was going to be cashing in his contract ahead of time. So rather than running out and making it a surprise, he went to, I guess, whoever the general manager or whoever the official was in charge of the company on storyline at the time. He went to them and he was like, hey, I want to have this match in the ECW arena in front of these fans that I know are going to have my back, and I want it against John Cena. And so that's how the match came into being. And I guess the story around it going in was that Cena was given this time to prepare by having been told that the Money in the Bank was going to be cashed in ahead of time. But then also, Rob Van Dam was doing it because at this pay-per-view, at One Night Stand on an ECW show, he would be in his element because he's one of those main faces. He's one of those main names to come out of ECW. It's him, it's Tommy Dreamer, it's Taz, Sabu. But point is, he's one of those guys. And so I guess in storyline, the idea is that he has the advantage of this hometown crowd, and Cena still has the advantage of knowing who his opponent is ahead of time and it not being a surprise cash-in. So the whole point when you get to the show, what the commentators are trying to push throughout that whole entire One Night Stand pay-per-view is that the audience is going to be very, very hostile towards John Cena, and it's all about how he's going to be able to handle that pressure. Because in 2006, he isn't this superstar with this vast amount of experience as champion, as the top guy of the company. So it's still a sort of viable story to tell that he might crack under pressure. And that's what they were going with going into the match, because those ECW fans were absolutely vicious. They're the same audience who earlier that night booed Rey Mysterio, who in 2006 was as good of a good guy as you could be, but he was going against Sabu in some sort of hardcore whatever match, and they booed him badly. So if that's how they're treating poor little Rey, they are not going to be kind to Cena whatsoever. So Rob Van Dam was the first man to come out for the main event of the pay-per-view, and when you go to the crowd, you can already see sort of how this match is going to be unfolding, because the first shot of them is some guy holding a sign that says, "I came to see Cena die." And then when Cena makes his entrance, you can tell there's a very, very different kind of booing that he receives than what he does in WWE now, where it's more playful and it's like, oh, it's John Cena, we all love him, we all respect him, but we're going to boo him because it's John Cena, that's what we do. Back then, in 2006, with these ECW fans who love Rob Van Dam, it was hatred. It felt like these people were actually invested in this match and they wanted to see John Cena, as the sign put it, die. And so they were vicious. They were very vicious. And this was that same show where that famous spot happened where Cena threw his shirt and his hat into the crowd and they would throw it right back at him in the middle of the ring. And that lasted for a few minutes. And really, like, the crowd even started throwing toilet paper at him in the early going of the match. And the story they were telling was that Cena was sort of playing along with the crowd. Like, he was seeing their anger and he was just sort of laughing at it and playing along with it and not taking it too seriously. And for the most part of the early going of the match, Cena dominated. He just manhandled Rob Van Dam and made him seem like he didn't belong in a match with the WWE champion. But then as time went on, you could see the crowd starting to get into the head of Cena, and Rob Van Dam started to mount some offense of his own. And the idea was that Cena realized that he had to start taking the match seriously, which for the first about 15 minutes or so, the first 10-15 minutes of the match, he wasn't doing. So by the time he actually started, Van Dam was in control, and he even got a chair at one point in the ring, and he was smashing Cena in the face and the sternum with it, and it was really vicious, and it was just what you expect out of a Rob Van Dam match, and especially when he has a chair in his hands. And at one point, too, I want to mention this, Cena, with this rabid crowd on the outside, more rabid than any crowd I've ever seen, ever. That's not an exaggeration. They were the angriest, most vicious crowd. Cena decided during the match to go out among them and beat up Van Dam. Like, no security guard, no anything. Just walk out into the crowd over the barricade and start beating up Van Dam, which, a very, very brave move, which I found very, very admirable. But after that, point is, Rob Van Dam ended up with a chair and ended up taking on Cena and just making fairly easy work of the WWE champion because, again, it had taken him so long to realize that he needed to take Van Dam seriously as a threat. And then at one point, though, Cena was able to get some sort of reversal and he DDT'd Rob Van Dam headfirst onto the chair. And then you could tell Cena was finally in control and also serious and focused on the match and less preoccupied with the crowd. And he catapulted Rob Van Dam, too, head first into the chair, which he had set up in between the turnbuckles, in a really, really vicious move. It was gross, and Van Dam's head just went straight through it, and it was real gross. And then Cena went for the 5-knuckle shuffle, and it just, Cena looked like he was in control, and it looked like what would be the obvious end of the match. It looked like Cena was going to be winning. And then also, at one point, Rob Van Dam messed up a move, but even though it was clearly, like, in retrospect and watching it on the network, it was clearly Rob Van Dam who had screwed up this move with the ropes. The crowd blamed Cena and were just chanting like that he effed up and all this stuff. And it was great because even though it probably wasn't supposed to be part of the plan for the match, it really added to it because you could see how the crowd, when clearly it was Van Dam who messed up this move, they were still firmly behind him and just decided to blame it on Cena instead because confirmation bias, you know? So that was fun. And then at one point, it looks like Cena's about to win. He does the STF. But then Rob Van Dam somehow broke out of the hold. The referees got involved, and Cena knocked one of the refs down. And the referee in the match originally was this ECW official. And so Cena got into a fight with him, and I guess the idea was that the ECW ref was biased, so Cena wasn't having any of it. And then a referee from SmackDown from WWE comes out to replace the knockdown referee, which the crowd hated because now, clearly there's an unfair advantage because a WWE official is out here, and he's going to help Cena maintain his title. And then somehow that referee also gets taken down, I'm pretty sure by Rob Van Dam, and you just are, it's really confused as to what's happening. And then at one point, just Cena, after he takes out both the officials, tosses Rob Van Dam to the outside. And it's a confusing point in the match because you don't know if it's going to end soon or what's happening, but you can still tell Cena's in a dominant position. And then all of a sudden, some man in a black jacket, of like a trench coat, and just a really black motorcycle helmet, just runs into the ring and is just standing there staring down Cena, and Cena's just really confused as to what's going on. And then at one point, the man in the trench coat just runs forward and spears Cena through a table, which had been set up earlier in the match by, I believe, Van Dam. And so Cena was just speared through this table. And then the guy in the trench coat and the helmet, he takes it off, and it's revealed to be this very young and very handsome Edge. And I guess that was the point when they were having their rivalry, where I don't remember much about it because I wasn't watching wrestling at the time. It was a couple years before I started, but I do know that their rivalry involved John Cena's real-life dad, and that was great. It was great. So this was part of that same time frame, part of that same story. And Edge had just speared John Cena through a table, and Rob Van Dam was just getting his wits about him on the outside, got back in the ring, realized that Cena was down, went for the frog splash off the top turnbuckle, looked like he was going to win, but then when he goes for the cover, it is remembered that there is no official. So the crowd is just pissed off. They're booing. Rob Van Dam's just confused as to what to do because both the officials are down. And then comes out Paul Heyman, runs to the ring, slides in, makes the count 1, 2, 3, and Rob Van Dam became, for the first time in his career, the WWE champion. And so it was really cool. And Rob Van Dam's one of those guys that you don't always remember as being WWE champ, and rightfully so, because it only lasted a month or about, because just a little bit after that, he was arrested for drug possession in a car with Sabu. And after that, they didn't want that to be a thing associated with the face of their company. So they made him lose both the WWE title and the ECW championship, which he held at the same time, to the Edge and Big Show in consecutive nights, just less than 2 months later. So it wasn't the most memorable reign per se, but that night is just one of the ones that fans look back at and remember the most about just wrestling and WWE, CW in general. And it was a lot of fun, and I guess for some people it was their first match as well as it was for Sam Gelfand. But guys, I've just realized I've gone over the hour, and the people for the next show still aren't here. So I have some time to just finish up with some closing thoughts. So it's real sad that RVD had to drop the title just less than 2 months later. And then also that it just leaves a feeling in my gut of like what could have been, because you think of Rob Van Dam, and yeah, he's a star, and yeah, he's a big name in wrestling, but you also don't associate him with other WWE champions like the John Cenas of the world, like the Edges, like the Randy Ortons, the Triple H's, the Stone Colds. But I mean, he's on that list, and good for him on it, even though it was for a month or so. So, and I don't blame WWE for stripping him of the title either shortly after that. It makes sense. You don't want that as the look of the champion, of the man representing your company. So I don't blame them. It's just, again, a matter of what could have been. But guys, this has been another week of Main Stage Wrestling right here on WERW Real College Radio. I am Jacy Cola. I did this show by myself. I went at it alone this week. And I hope it turned out at least listenable, because it's a first thing for me. It was a learning experience, and I'm not upset with myself for how it went, but I'll have to listen back, and I'll get back to you next week with my personal evaluation of this show.